You have come here tonight because the secret dialogue between light and darkness inside your soul has begun to speak louder than the chatter of the world. Tonight, we venture into the depths of human psychology, into the archetypal realm where two ancient figures meet in an eternal dance of projection and absorption. When I speak of the empath and the narcissist, I speak not merely of clinical diagnoses or social roles, but of archetypal energies that have played across the stage of human consciousness for millennia. These are mythic forces, eternal patterns that wear different masks across cultures and centuries, yet remain fundamentally unchanged in their essence. The empath enters this world like a vessel already cracked open, porous to the emotional currents that others cannot sense. They are the child who learned to survive by reading the unseen tensions in a room, who discovered that peace came only when they absorbed the pain of others before it could explode into violence. Before we dive deeper, if this resonates with your soul's journey, please hit that like button and subscribe for more transformational content. Your support helps this message reach other souls who need to hear it. Picture the empath as one who breathes in the suffering of the world, believing this to be their sacred calling. They carry within themselves the unhealed shadows of neglect, abandonment, and an unconscious guilt that whispers they are responsible for everyone's emotional well-being. Their sensitivity, which should have been their greatest gift, becomes their heaviest burden. They become human sponges, soaking up every projection, every disowned emotion, every fragment of shadow that others cannot bear to claim as their own. Now envision the narcissist not as a monster with horns, but as a soul so profoundly fragmented that survival depends upon the construction of an elaborate fortress of grandiosity. Behind this glittering mask lives a trembling child terrified of the void, within demanding constant fuel from the devotion and submission of others. The narcissist carries the shadows of shame, fragility, and a bottomless emptiness that feels like death itself. To avoid this confrontation, they become masters of projection, casting their darkness onto willing vessels, surviving by feeding on the reflected light of others rather than cultivating their own inner flame. These two figures are drawn together with a magnetism that feels fated, as if the universe itself conspired to orchestrate this meeting. But what appears to be love is actually an unconscious collision of complementary wounds. The empath, seeing the narcissist's grandiose mask, projects their own hidden strength onto this figure, secretly longing to claim such confidence for themselves. The narcissist, sensing the empath's capacity for absorption, projects their vulnerability onto this willing vessel, seeking someone who will mirror back their lost humanity without demanding they face it directly. Together, they create an alchemical ritual where one gives endlessly and the other takes compulsively. Energy flows like a river in one direction, creating a dynamic that feels necessary, even sacred to both participants. Yet the psyche is not a static thing. It is a living field of energy, constantly seeking balance and wholeness. For the empath, there comes a threshold moment, a crossing point, when continuing to absorb becomes an act of self-annihilation. This awakening often arrives disguised as breakdown, as collapse, as a dark night of the soul so profound that no external savior appears. It is precisely in this darkness that the alchemical reversal begins to occur. The empath stops apologizing for pain that was never theirs to bear. They cease cushioning the narcissist's fragile ego with their own life force. They stop pretending that love requires the erasure of self. In this moment, something extraordinary happens. The empath ceases to be merely an empath. They become a mirror of truth. The cup of empathy overflows, and the soul's rebellion against the tyranny of false love begins. This is not the emergence of cruelty, but the birth of clarity, the awakening of discernment that has been dormant beneath layers of adaptive compassion. To return the darkness is not an act of revenge or cruelty. It is an act of recognition of justice, of soul necessity. Just as the body cannot thrive when filled with poison, the psyche cannot flourish while carrying shadows that are not its own. Imagine standing in a cavern of mirrors, each reflecting not your face, but the faces of those who have used you, who have demanded your endless compassion. As you stand in the center, you realize these mirrors are not prisons, but doorways. When you turn them outward, the reflection no longer consumes you. It returns to its source. This is the gesture of returning darkness, turning the mirror so that projection flows back to its origin. It is done not with hatred, for hatred would keep you chained to the other, but with clarity, with the recognition that the soul cannot flourish when buried under foreign shadows. The words may be simple, "This is yours, not mine," but they carry the authority of the self, the power of truth that has been long suppressed. This act breaks the spell of distorted reflections, forcing both participants to confront their authentic faces beneath the masks of projection and absorption. When the narcissist is confronted with their returned darkness, they experience what can only be described as ontological terror. Their entire psychic economy has depended on expelling this shadow into others, surviving through externalization. When you return their darkness, you strip them of their primary survival mechanism. The fury that often erupts is not mere anger, but the rage of an ego that experiences truth as annihilation. For them, the shadow represents death itself. They may lash out like wounded animals, deploy manipulation, guilt, and accusations of cruelty. They may seek new hosts to carry their burden, unable to endure the mirror of their own darkness. Yet some, though rare, may be shaken awake. In the returned shadow, they finally glimpse their own lost humanity, the abandoned child, the unacknowledged wound that birthed the mask. For these few, the empath becomes an unwitting messenger of fate, a reluctant angel forcing them toward the possibility of their own redemption. For the empath returning, the darkness initiates a process that can only be described as death and resurrection. It is the death of the false identity, built on being the eternal caretaker, the healer, who must sacrifice themselves to be loved. This psychological death brings terror and disorientation. The empath may feel they are betraying their deepest nature, abandoning their sacred calling. Guilt claws at them, whispering that they are selfish, cruel, unnatural. But this too is part of the individuation process. For true compassion is not the abandonment of self, but the balance of self and other. It is love that illuminates rather than destroys. This drama echoes throughout mythology. For myth is the dream of humanity itself. Consider Persephone dragged into Hades' underworld, forced to consume the seeds that bind her to darkness. She becomes not merely victim, but queen of the underworld, learning to inhabit darkness with authority. The empath's journey mirrors this descent and return. They must taste the bitterness of shadow, must descend into the underworld of projection and absorption. But the awakening comes when they ascend carrying wisdom that no longer enslaves, but liberates. In alchemical terms, this is the negredo, the blackening. When the vessel of the soul is filled with darkness, so the true transformation may begin. The empath discovers that what they sought to transmute in others was actually the raw material of their own becoming. The principle of solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine, operates here. The old arrangement of parasitic feeding and self-sacrificing absorption dissolves, making space for new forms of authentic relationship. In the silence that follows the return, the empath discovers something extraordinary. They begin to hear their own voice, feel their own desires, sense their own boundaries rising from depths long suppressed. The energy that once bled into carrying another's shadow returns to them, erupting as creative force, as authentic presence, as the sacred power of being themselves. The empath transforms from perpetual victim or savior into sovereign soul, from wounded healer into wise warrior. They discover their sensitivity is not a curse, but a compass meant not to chain them to others' wounds. but to guide them into the depths of truth. When we speak of the narcissist's potential transformation, we must understand the magnitude of what this entails. For them, accepting their returned darkness means facing what feels like annihilation. The mask that has protected them since childhood must be voluntarily removed. This process often begins with what appears to be complete breakdown. The narcissist may lose relationships, career, health. Everything built on the foundation of the false self begins to crumble. This is their dark night of the soul, their descent into the underworld. Those rare few who endure this passage without fleeing into deeper denial or addiction discover something extraordinary. Beneath the mask lies not the void they feared, but a wounded child who has been waiting for acknowledgement. This transformation ripples far beyond the personal. When the empath returns the narcissist's darkness, they participate in healing the collective unconscious itself. For the world is ensnared in cycles of projection and absorption, shadows displaced and burdens misplaced. Each act of return is a light struck in the vast darkness. Each refusal to carry what is not yours contributes to the liberation of humanity itself. For whenever one soul refuses to be enslaved by projection, the archetypal field shifts and new possibilities emerge. In families, when one empath awakens, generations tremble. For families are networks of projection webs of unconscious exchange. The father who cast his rage onto his son, the mother who poured her despair into her daughter. These patterns depend on empaths who remain silent. But one voice saying no, one act of returning begins to dissolve centuries of shadow. This is sacred ancestral healing work, serving not only personal liberation, but the liberation of lineages. What emerges from this transformation is not the death of love, but its rebirth in authentic form. The empath who has awakened no longer attracts narcissistic partners in the same way, for the dance requires both participants. When one refuses the steps, the cycle collapses. The old paradigm of relationships built on need absorption and projection dissolves, making space for connections grounded in mutual recognition and freedom. True compassion flows from fullness, not emptiness. Boundaries become sacred fire rather than walls. Love becomes the radiant exchange of two whole souls who have faced their own shadows and emerged alive. This is not love based on need absorption or illusion, but love grounded in mutual recognition, freedom, and the celebration of wholeness meeting wholeness. The unconscious confirms this transformation through dreams rich with archetypal symbolism. The empath who once dreamed of drowning now dreams of swimming freely. Those who dreamed of being chased by wolves now stand among them calm and unafraid. These dreams speak of integration of boundaries restored, of the soul reclaiming its own terrain. They signal that the work of returning has been received by the deepest layers of the psyche. Synchronicities multiply. The world itself begins to conspire with the awakened empath, offering signs and confirmations. They may find feathers on their path, hear songs that echo their inner state, meet strangers who speak words they needed to hear. This is the universe welcoming them home to themselves. Authentic relationships emerge to replace those built on unconscious patterns, though often after a period of sacred solitude. In the aftermath of return, the empath often encounters a profound silence. The narcissist is no longer filling the space with demands, and this silence can feel unbearable at first. Yet this silence is sacred. It is the womb of rebirth, the space in which the self can grow roots. In this solitude, forgotten dreams whisper, buried passions stir. The empath begins to feel life not as a drain, but as a song subtle and radiant, filled with the strange music of their own soul. This is not loneliness, but holy aloneness, and the condition necessary for authentic relationship with both self and others. Only from this place of wholeness can true empathy emerge. Not empathy poisoned by fear or motivated by survival, but empathy that flows freely from the fullness of being. The awakened empath discovers they are not the endless mirror of another's fear. They are the fire that burns in the darkness. They are the river that flows when no one commands it. They are the voice that speaks from the depths of the self. Yet the story does not end with a single act of return. The empath who awakens discovers that individuation is not a destination, but a continuous journey, a spiraling path that leads ever deeper into the mysteries of the self. Each day brings new opportunities to practice discernment, to recognize the subtle ways projection and absorption continue to operate. The old patterns do not die easily. They resurface like ancient ghosts, whispering familiar promises of meaning through sacrifice of love through self-erasure. Yet we must speak of a shadow that can emerge even in the act of return itself. For some empaths, the process of returning darkness can become a new form of obsession, a righteous crusade that paradoxically keeps them bound to the very dynamics they seek to escape. The empath may find themselves constantly analyzing interactions, perpetually vigilant for projections to return, turning the sacred act of boundary setting into a weapon of judgment. They may develop a spiritual superiority about their awakening, unconsciously looking down upon those still trapped in unconscious patterns. The mature empath learns to return darkness with the same neutrality with which one might return a misdelivered package. There is no drama, no righteousness, no need to make the other understand. The return becomes a simple act of energetic hygiene, necessary but unremarkable. Modern neuroscience reveals why these patterns are so difficult to break. The empath-narcissist dynamic often creates what researchers call trauma bonding, a powerful biochemical attachment that forms through intermittent reinforcement and shared stress responses. When the empath absorbs the narcissist's darkness, their nervous system floods with stress hormones. When brief moments of connection or approval follow dopamine and oxytocin, create powerful reward pathways in the brain. This biochemical cocktail can be more addictive than many substances. Understanding this helps the awakening empath have compassion for their own struggle to break free. The pull to return to familiar dynamics is not weakness, but biology. Recovery requires patience with the body's adjustment period as the nervous system learns new patterns of regulation. The patterns we've explored rarely originate with the individuals involved. Most empaths and narcissists are unconsciously replaying dynamics inherited from their lineages. The empath may carry generations of women who sacrifice themselves for impossible love. The narcissist may embody centuries of men who learn to survive through grandiosity and emotional unavailability. When the empath begins returning darkness, they often encounter resistance not just from the narcissist, but from ancestral voices within their own psyche. These voices whisper familiar refrains. Good women sacrifice for love. Your worth lies in your usefulness. To have boundaries is selfish. Healing requires dialogue with these ancestral patterns. The awakening empath must honor the survival wisdom of their forebears, while also recognizing which strategies no longer serve. They become conscious ancestors for future generations, breaking chains that have bound their lineage for centuries. In focusing on returning the narcissist's darkness, we must not forget that the empath too has shadow to face. Often hidden beneath the identity of the perpetual giver lies a complex web of resentment, superiority, and control. The empath may discover that their giving was not as pure as they believed. Perhaps there was an unconscious sense of superiority in being the good one, the one who sacrifices. Perhaps there was a hidden attempt to control others through indispensability to ensure love through being needed. This shadow emerges when the empath stops absorbing. Suddenly faced with their own inner landscape, they may encounter rage, selfishness, even cruelty they never knew they possessed. This is not a failure. but a necessary encounter with their complete humanity. The integration of this personal shadow is as crucial as returning the projected shadow of others. For wholeness includes all aspects of the self: the light and the dark, the generous and the selfish, the loving and the destructive. One of the most challenging aspects of the empath's awakening is the emergence of rage. Years or decades of absorbed abuse, denied needs, and suppressed authenticity often erupt in volcanic anger once the process of return begins. This rage terrifies many empaths who have been conditioned to see anger as dangerous or unspiritual. Yet this anger is sacred. It is the life force reasserting itself, the soul's outrage at being diminished and denied. Working with this rage requires skilled support. The empath must learn to honor the anger without being consumed by it, to use its energy for transformation rather than destruction. Often this means physical practices that allow the energy to move. Martial arts, dance, vigorous exercise. The rage phase is temporary but essential. It burns away the false conditioning that kept the empath trapped. Like a forest fire that clears dead undergrowth, this anger creates space for new growth. The empath-narcissist dynamic extends far beyond personal relationships into economic and political systems. Many organizational structures depend on empathic individuals absorbing the toxic projections of those in power while receiving minimal compensation or recognition. The healthcare worker who absorbs patients' trauma without adequate support systems. The teacher who takes on the emotional burdens of troubled students while being blamed for systemic failures. The social worker who carries the pain of entire communities while being underpaid and undervalued. As empaths awaken to their patterns, these systems must transform. Organizations that depend on burnout and emotional exploitation lose their workforce. New models emerge that honor the value of emotional labor while providing appropriate boundaries and support. Recent research suggests that many individuals labeled as empaths may actually be highly sensitive people with different neurological wiring. Their nervous systems may be naturally more permeable, more attuned to subtle environmental cues. Understanding this reframes the narrative from one of pathology to one of neurodiversity. The highly sensitive person is not broken or destined to suffer. They simply require different strategies for thriving in a world not designed for their nervous system. This perspective removes shame from the empath's experience, while still honoring the need for boundaries and conscious relationship. It's not that they shouldn't be sensitive. It's that they need to learn how to be sensitive in healthy ways. At the deepest level, the empath-narcissist dynamic represents an imbalance between archetypal feminine and masculine principles. The empath embodies the feminine principle of receptivity and connection taken to an extreme. The narcissist represents the masculine principle of individuation and power, distorted by woundedness. Healing requires both individuals to develop their less expressed archetypal aspects. The empath must cultivate healthy masculine qualities, discrimination boundaries, self-advocacy. The narcissist must reconnect with healthy feminine qualities, receptivity, vulnerability, empathy. This is not about gender, but about archetypal energies present in all individuals regardless of biological sex. The awakening person learns to dance fluidly between these principles, receptive when appropriate, boundaried when necessary. Individual healing, while necessary, is insufficient for lasting transformation. The patterns we've explored are sustained by cultural norms and community expectations. True change requires collective effort. Healing communities are emerging where these dynamics can be addressed systemically. Support groups for people recovering from narcissistic relationships. Therapy groups focused on boundary work and projection recognition. Spiritual communities that honor both individual sovereignty and collective responsibility. These communities become laboratories for healthy relationship dynamics. They provide safe spaces to practice new ways of being to receive feedback on blind spots, to experience connection without absorption or projection. One of the ongoing challenges for the awakening empath is learning to live in a world that still largely operates on unconscious projection and absorption. They must maintain their newfound clarity while navigating family systems, workplaces, and social structures that haven't made this shift. This requires what might be called bilingual consciousness, the ability to speak both the language of unconscious patterns and conscious relationship. The awakening empath learns when to engage and when to withdraw, when to educate and when to simply model a different way. This is ongoing work that requires constant discernment. The empath must resist both the temptation to become a crusader for consciousness and the temptation to withdraw completely from engaged relationship. One of the most sophisticated skills the awakening empath develops is timing, knowing when the moment is right for return, for boundary setting, for difficult conversations. This timing cannot be forced or calculated. It arises from deep attunement to the rhythms of relationship and individual readiness. Sometimes the most powerful action is patient waiting. The empath learns to hold their truth without immediately expressing it, allowing the right moment to emerge naturally. Other times, immediate action is required to prevent further harm. Developing this timing requires cultivating what might be called strategic compassion, love that is wise rather than merely reactive, boundaries that are clean rather than punitive. From an evolutionary perspective, the mass awakening of empaths may represent humanity's attempt to evolve beyond patterns of domination and submission. The increasing recognition of these dynamics suggests a collective readiness for more conscious forms of relationship. This transition is not without growing pains. As old patterns break down before new ones are fully established, there may be periods of chaos and confusion. Relationships end, institutions transform, individuals must learn new ways of being. Yet this chaos is creative. It's the dissolution necessary for reorganization at a higher level of complexity. The empaths who are awakening serve as evolutionary scouts, exploring new territories of consciousness and reporting back to the collective. In the deepest transformation, the categories of empath and narcissist eventually dissolve. These labels, while useful for understanding dynamics, can become limiting identities if held too rigidly. The truly integrated person moves fluidly between appropriate empathy and healthy narcissism, between receptivity and boundaries, between individual sovereignty and collective responsibility. They are neither the perpetual absorber nor the chronic projector, but a conscious participant in the dance of relationship. This integration doesn't mean the person becomes invulnerable to unconscious patterns. It means they recognize these patterns more quickly and have tools for addressing them. They become students of consciousness rather than victims of unconsciousness. Ultimately, the empath's journey toward returning darkness is about legacy. What patterns we pass on to future generations, what possibilities we create for those who come after us. Every empath who breaks the cycle of unconscious absorption makes it easier for others to do the same. Every narcissist who faces their shadow removes a source of toxicity from the collective field. Every relationship that transforms from unconscious projection to conscious connection becomes a model for others. This is how consciousness evolves, not through mass movements or imposed changes, but through individuals who dare to live differently, who risk the discomfort of growth for the sake of authenticity. The awakening empath becomes an ancestor of the future, creating conditions that will allow their descendants to live with greater freedom, consciousness, and authentic connection. And so we return to where we began, the sacred act of giving back what was never ours to carry. But now we understand this return in its full complexity as both a simple, energetic gesture and a profound evolutionary act. When the empath finally returns, the narcissist's darkness worlds shift. Not just the personal worlds of the individuals involved, but the larger world of human relationship itself. Each such act weakens the collective patterns of unconscious projection and strengthens the field of conscious connection. This is the true magic of the work, that by healing ourselves, we heal the world. By refusing to carry what is not ours, we create space for what is truly ours to emerge. By claiming our sovereignty, we invite others to claim theirs. The return of darkness is simultaneously the revelation of light, not the false light of spiritual bypassing or naive optimism, but the mature light of integrated consciousness, the radiance that emerges when shadow and light dance together in conscious relationship. This is the gift the awakening empath offers the world, the demonstration that it is possible to be sensitive without being victimized to care, without being consumed to love, without losing oneself. In embodying this possibility, they become beacons for others who are ready to make their own journey home to wholeness. What happens when the empath finally returns the narcissist's darkness? The world trembles not because violence has been done, but because truth has been spoken. The archetypal dance of victim and predator savior and tyrant absorber and projector is disrupted. A new possibility enters the field of human experience, the possibility of relationship without exploitation, compassion without annihilation, love without illusion. Every soul that breaks this pattern contributes not only to their own liberation, but to the liberation of humanity itself. The return of darkness is actually the dawn of light. To hand back what was never yours is to finally receive what has always been waiting. The wholeness of your own being, the radiance of your own soul, the freedom to live as yourself without apology or compromise. This is the sacred return, not to some distant paradise, but to the eternal truth of who you have always been, beneath the masks, beyond the projections, deeper than any shadow you were asked to carry. When you stand in this truth, you discover that you are not the endless mirror of another's fear. You are the fire that burns in the darkness. You are the river that flows when no one commands it. You are the voice that speaks from the depths of the self. And from this place, you begin to live not as the echo of another's need, but as the song of your own becoming. This is individuation. This is freedom. This is the truth that has been waiting for you all along. The silence that follows is pregnant with possibility, holding space for the profound transformation that awaits those who dare to return what was never theirs and claim what has always been their own. For the empath learning to navigate these waters, certain technological tools become invaluable. Energy tracking apps that help monitor emotional patterns throughout the day. Biofeedback devices that indicate when the nervous system is dysregulated. Heart rate variability monitors that show the impact of different interactions. These tools help the empath develop the crucial skill of discernment, the ability to distinguish between their own emotional reality and absorbed material. Over time, this discernment becomes second nature, requiring no external validation. Meditation practices specifically designed for empaths focus on energetic boundary work, visualizations of protective shields, practices of energetic return techniques for clearing absorbed material. These are not mere New Age fantasies, but practical tools for nervous system regulation. Breathwork becomes particularly important as the empath learns to use their breath to maintain energetic sovereignty. Certain breathing patterns can quickly discharge absorbed energy, while others can strengthen personal boundaries. The awakening empath learns to create what might be called a psychic hygiene routine. Daily practices that clear foreign energy and reinforce their authentic energetic signature. This might include cold showers to reset the nervous system, specific foods that ground their energy, movement practices that discharge tension. A particular danger for the awakening empath is spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts to avoid dealing with practical realities. the empath might declare themselves beyond certain relationships or situations without doing the deeper work of integration. True awakening requires engaging with both the transcendent and the mundane. The empath must learn to return darkness while still showing up for legitimate responsibilities. They must develop boundaries while maintaining compassion. They must claim their sovereignty while honoring their interconnectedness. This middle path requires constant recalibration. The pendulum often swings from total absorption to complete withdrawal before finding a sustainable center. Patience with this process is essential, as is willingness to make mistakes and adjust course. The mature empath learns that spiritual awakening doesn't exempt them from human challenges. It gives them better tools for navigating those challenges consciously. They understand that enlightenment and engagement are not opposites, but dance partners. One of the most remarkable transformations occurs in the realm of creativity. The empath who has been pouring their life force into absorbing others' darkness often discovers an explosion of creative energy once this dynamic ceases. Art, music, writing, movement all become outlets for the authentic self that has been buried beneath layers of absorbed shadow. The empath discovers they have their own story to tell, their own beauty to create, their own unique gift to offer the world. This creative emergence is often accompanied by a sense of urgency, as if decades of suppressed expression are demanding release. The awakening empath may find themselves writing books, painting masterpieces, composing songs, not from obligation or external pressure, but from the sheer joy of authentic self-expression. The creative process becomes a form of alchemy itself, transforming the pain of absorption into the gold of artistic expression. What was once unconscious suffering becomes conscious creation, serving not only the artist's healing, but offering gifts to the collective. Many empaths discover that their sensitivity, once a burden, becomes their greatest artistic asset. They can feel into subtleties that others miss, translate emotional nuances into form, bridge the visible and invisible worlds through their creative work. Modern neuroscience confirms what depth psychology has long understood: that these profound shifts create measurable changes in the brain. The empath who learns to maintain healthy boundaries develops stronger neural pathways for self-regulation and discernment. The default mode network, often overactive in empaths due to constant external focus, begins to settle into healthier patterns. The nervous system learns the difference between appropriate empathy and pathological absorption. Research shows that practices like meditation, breathwork, and somatic therapy literally rewire the brain. The amygdala becomes less reactive. The prefrontal cortex strengthens its regulatory capacity, and new neural networks for healthy boundary setting develop. Even the narcissist, if they choose the path of awakening, can develop new neural pathways. The capacity for genuine empathy, long suppressed beneath defensive structures, can be cultivated through conscious practice. This gives hope to what might otherwise seem like fixed patterns. The brain's plasticity means that even deeply ingrained dynamics of projection and absorption can be transformed through sustained conscious effort. The awakening empath often reports feeling like they have a new brain. Patterns of worry and absorption that once seemed automatic begin to feel foreign and unnecessary. Many empaths, once awakened, discover unexpected leadership capacities. No longer bound by the need to absorb and fix, they can offer clear guidance and genuine wisdom. They become the therapists who don't take on their clients' trauma, the teachers who inspire, without burning out, the parents who nurture without enabling. This is leadership from wholeness rather than woundedness. The awakened empath leads not by example of endless sacrifice, but by demonstration of healthy boundaries and authentic presence. They show others that it is possible to care deeply without being consumed. Such leaders often face resistance from those who prefer the old model of self-sacrificing service. But their steady presence gradually shifts the entire culture of the organizations and communities they serve. The awakened empath as leader brings what might be called embodied wisdom. They don't just teach concepts, but model what integration looks like in daily life. Their leadership style is neither authoritarian nor permissive, but authentically responsive to what each situation requires. Imagine a world where empaths no longer sacrifice themselves on the altar of others' unconsciousness, where narcissistic patterns cannot find willing vessels to enable their destructive cycles, where authentic empathy flows freely without the distortion of projection and absorption. This is not a utopian fantasy, but a practical possibility as more individuals do the work of conscious relationship. Each awakening empath contributes to this transformation. Each returned shadow moves the collective toward greater health. The systems that depend on unconscious projection, from abusive relationships to exploitative economic structures, begin to transform as their unconscious foundations are removed. New forms of leadership, governance, and community become possible. In this emerging paradigm, sensitivity is honored as a gift rather than exploited as weakness. Boundaries are respected as sacred rather than attacked as selfish. Authentic relationship becomes the norm rather than the exception. Children grow up learning emotional sovereignty from the beginning, never needing to absorb others' pain to feel valuable. The next generation inherits tools for conscious relationship rather than patterns of unconscious entanglement. From the broadest perspective, the empath-narcissist dynamic represents universal principles of energy exchange playing out through human relationship. In physics, we understand that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. The same principle applies to psychic energy. When the empath absorbs the narcissist's darkness, they are not eliminating that energy. They are temporarily holding it in a different form. But energy seeks its natural state of flow and balance. The return of darkness is simply energy finding its way back to its source. This cosmic perspective helps remove the personal drama from the process. The empath is not being cruel by returning darkness. They are participating in the universe's tendency toward equilibrium. The narcissist is not evil for projecting. They are unconsciously following energetic patterns that seek resolution. Understanding these dynamics at a cosmic level brings profound compassion for all participants. Everyone is doing their best with the consciousness they have available. The awakening process is simply consciousness expanding to include more possibilities. From quantum physics, we understand that consciousness plays a role in creating reality. The observer affects the observed. When the empath shifts their consciousness from absorption to return, they literally alter the quantum field of the relationship. What was once a stable pattern of projection and absorption becomes unstable, seeking new forms of equilibrium. The narcissist must either find a new empath to maintain the old pattern or evolve into new forms of relationship. This quantum perspective suggests that consciousness work is not just personal healing, but active participation in reality creation. Each empath who awakens shifts the probability field toward more conscious relationships for everyone. The implications are profound. Our healing work affects not just our immediate relationships, but the entire web of consciousness in which we're embedded. Every act of returning darkness contributes to the evolution of human relationship itself. Many awakening empaths find it helpful to create ceremony around the process of returning darkness. This might involve literal rituals, writing letters to return projections, burning items that represent absorbed energy, or visualization ceremonies of giving back what doesn't belong. The ritual aspect honors the sacred nature of the work, while also engaging the unconscious mind through symbol and metaphor. The psyche responds to ceremony in ways that purely cognitive approaches cannot access. Some empaths create altar spaces dedicated to the work of return, places where they can consciously release foreign energy and reclaim their own. Others develop personal ceremonies performed at significant transitions or when they recognize absorption patterns emerging. The key is that ceremony makes conscious what was unconscious. It transforms automatic patterns into deliberate choices. It honors both the difficulty and the sacredness of the transformation process. Creating community around these ceremonies can be particularly powerful. When empaths witness each other's return processes, they strengthen their own capacity for healthy boundaries while building relationships based on mutual empowerment rather than codependency. In the end, the empath's journey reveals that their true calling was never to be the repository of others' pain, but to be a conscious participant in the healing of the world. They discover that their sensitivity is not a curse to be managed, but a gift to be stewarded wisely. The returned darkness makes space for the true light. Not the reflected glow stolen from others, but the authentic radiance of the integrated self. This light does not diminish when shared, but grows brighter, illuminating the path for others who are ready to make their own journey home. When the empath finally returns the narcissist's darkness, they discover they are not diminished, but expanded. They are not less loving, but more truly loving. They are not abandoning their purpose, but finally fulfilling it. For the empath's true purpose was always to embody the possibility of conscious compassion, healthy boundaries, and authentic relationship. In learning to return what is not theirs, they finally claim what is. The radiant, indestructible truth of their own magnificent being. This is the sacred return, not just the giving back of foreign darkness, but the coming home to the light that was always their own. It is the recognition that we are not here to carry each other's burdens, but to inspire each other's freedom. We are not here to fix each other, but to love each other into wholeness. The awakening empath becomes a lighthouse, steady, radiant, offering guidance without abandoning their post. They stand rooted in their own truth while extending compassion to all who seek the shore of consciousness. This is what happens when the empath finally returns the narcissist's darkness. The world becomes a little more conscious, a little more free, a little more capable of authentic love. And in that becoming, we all find our way home to who we truly are. Music rises slowly, carrying the vibration of homecoming, of truth acknowledged, of freedom claimed at last.